Welcome, everybody, to the deep dive, August 2025. We have a lovely special guest, Elyssa Tappero. She's a Tsunami Program Manager for Washington State Emergency Management Division. I'm just going to turn it over to her and let her start, and then I do have a couple announcements at the end. So everybody enjoy.
Well, thank you for that introduction. As Anne said, my name is Elyssa, and I am the Tsunami Program Manager with Washington State Emergency Management Division. And today I'll be talking with you about tsunami hazards and risks specific to the Seattle area. So as you are all probably very aware, Washington is earthquake country. We actually have the second highest earthquake risk in the United States. So for us, it's not a matter of if we have a large earthquake in the next, several decades. It is a matter of when we have that large earthquake. We have several different kinds of earthquake sources, including our large subduction zone off our outer coast, which is the source of kind of what we refer to as the big one. We also have earthquakes that can occur deep in that subduction zone plate. The most recent one we had of those was the Nisqually earthquake in 2001. And then we also have crustal faults that run all across the state, but especially across the Puget Sound. And some of those include the Seattle Fault, the Chelan Fault, Tacoma Fault, Southwoody Island. We have a lot of them in this area. And so we have not had one of those in a very long time. But when we do, they can generate pretty large earthquakes as well. And of course, because we are earthquake country, we are also tsunami country. We have over 3,000 miles of shoreline with a lot of very important infrastructure in and around that shoreline, including the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, which are together the fourth largest container gateway in the United States. We have 7 Coast Guard stations and 4 Navy bases, the largest public ferry system in the United States. And anywhere between 175,000 to 300,000 or more people on any given day who are living, working, and recreating in our tsunami hazard zones. So what is a tsunami? We just had one very recently, so you may already be aware, but really tsunamis are any series of long multiple waves that are generated when water in a large body of water is displaced. They usually last anywhere from 12 to 24 hours or more, depending on how large that event is. And they are most often caused by underwater earthquakes, but we can also get them caused by landslides, volcanic eruptions like we had in 2022 with the Tonga volcanic eruption, and some weather phenomena. And the GIF that you see playing here is the kind of tsunami that is generated by that Cascadia subduction zone earthquake and tsunami, where we have that interlocking plate lifting up and lifting the whole ocean floor with it. Tsunamis can travel very far distances across the water in minutes or hours. So the one that we had back on the 29th traveled across the entire Pacific Ocean basin in a matter of hours. And the thing to remember with tsunamis is that the first wave that reaches us is often neither the highest wave nor the most destructive. For some of our Cascadia subduction zone modeling, depending on the location, it's often that third or fourth or even fifth wave that, according to our modeling at least, looks like is likely to be the largest or the most destructive. Tsunamis are very fast and very powerful because it's the entire column of water that's moving. It's not just the top like a wind wave. And so even when they are kind of smaller waves, if we're getting a distant tsunami and it's potentially only, a couple of feet or something, because it's that entire column of water, they are still have a lot of force behind them and the potential of causing a lot of damage. So we are lucky or unlucky here in Washington to be at risk from both distant and local tsunamis. Local tsunamis are essentially ones that are generated here in Washington or very close to Washington. If they're generated by an earthquake, that is an earthquake that we feel the shaking for. So it's one that occurs here in Washington. We feel that ground shaking, and that ground shaking is our first warning that a tsunami could be on the way. It is often our best warning and potentially our only warning. So we want folks to know that if they are on the coast and they feel that ground shaking, that is potentially their only warning that something could be arriving. Because that tsunami is being generated very close to us, there are usually, there's more inundation or flooding on land and much more severe currents associated with it. And therefore, we see a greater impact to our coasts. Our biggest local tsunami threats are, of course, the Cascadia subduction zone on our outer coast, and then the Seattle fault zone, which I'll talk about in a little bit, on our inner coast. And local tsunamis are a threat to both our inner and our outer coasts, again, because they cause so much destruction. Now, distant tsunamis are ones that are generated somewhere else in the Pacific Ocean. So those are ones where we don't feel that ground shaking. That earthquake is too far away for us to feel. And so official alerts are our primary warning for knowing something is coming to us. Because of that, because the tsunami is coming from across the ocean, there's usually less inundation and lower currents. We expect less of an impact to our coast. But we do still expect an impact, usually to our outer coast. So it's still something we want to be aware of. However, given kind of the shape of Washington's coastline, and especially the fact that distant tsunamis would have to travel all the way through the Strait of Juan de Fuca and then kind of down into the Puget Sound, distant tsunamis really are not much of a threat, if any threat at all, to folks in Seattle or down in the South Sound. So that is one good thing. So let's talk about our local tsunami threats. I mentioned the Cascadia subduction zone. It's about 700 miles long. It runs from Northern California up to Vancouver Island. So we are right smack dab in that kind of northern portion of it. And it usually generates a large earthquake every around 300 to 600 years. That's what we know from the historical record. The last great rupture was in the year 1700, so we are within that window, so to speak, for another one. And we have about a 15 to 25% chance within the next 50 years of getting that next big earthquake. And of course, every year that we don't have that earthquake, that percentage starts to tick up. So that is something that could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, or it could be, and hopefully will be, another 50 or 100 years down the road. When we get earthquakes on the Cascadia subduction zone, they are usually anywhere from a magnitude 8.0 to 9.0, or potentially even higher. So these are very, very large earthquakes. They can generate 3 to even 6 minutes of intense ground shaking. So if you were here in 2001 for the Nisqually earthquake, depending on where you were in Washington for that earthquake, the ground shook for about 30 to 45 seconds. And for me, at least, that felt like several minutes of shaking. So thinking about, 3 to 6 minutes of intense ground shaking, that's something that is really going to rattle, pun not intended, rattle a lot of folks. That is then followed by a major tsunami that hits our outer coast in about 15 to 20 minutes. And depending where you are on the inner coast, anywhere from about 90 to 120 minutes. So more time along the inner coast to evacuate to high ground. We also know, based on the kind of earthquake that this is and what we have seen in other countries, we will have hundreds of large aftershocks that will follow that main quake and thousands of smaller ones over the course of, the following decade and even longer than that. So while we tend to think of, the big one as this big one-time event, it's unfortunately something that kind of continues happening even as we are trying to respond and to recover and to really grapple with what has happened. This is also, at least right now, with our current kind of level of preparedness, going to be a mass fatality event for us, primarily from the tsunami and primarily along the outer coast. We do not anticipate a lot of fatalities from the tsunami along the inner coast because we have a lot of high ground close by here. We have a lot more time to evacuate to that high ground once that ground shaking stops. So if you hear a lot about kind of the casualties associated with Cascadia, that is definitely a reality, and that's something we have to grapple with, but that is something that we're really anticipating mostly on the outer coast. So this is a truncated version of a video from the Department of Natural Resources showing what the waves would look like for what we consider kind of the the event that we plan to, which is a 9.0 earthquake and associated tsunami on that subduction zone. So you can see over on the left, you've got the wave amplitude, which is the height of the wave. Those warmer colors going up into the dark red are 10 feet or higher. And then the cooler colors down into kind of the dark blue are 10 feet or lower. That's where the model caps out. So it could be that those waves are 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, or negative feet. That's just where it caps out. And then you've also got time since earthquake, it's sped up. But it gives you an idea of how quickly that first wave kicks off and then how it, oh, is it going to play again? It is not. How it travels through the Strait of Juan de Fuca and actually kind of splits and goes both directions. So you see, we get the trough of the wave first, which is that water pulling away from the shore. You can see it kind of reaching the islands in the Salish Sea and then kind of splitting, going both north and south down into the Puget Sound. So when we think about Cascadia, or the big one, this is an event that not just the ground shaking, but the tsunami itself is going to touch every inch of our shoreline all along Washington. Some areas obviously will have more impacts than others, but this is something that touches all of us in one way or another. Like I said, this is a truncated version of this video. The full version is online. There's also a version of this for current velocities. So if you are interested in seeing how the tsunami currents interact, especially along kind of our very tight, twisty waterways on the inner coast, I really recommend checking this out. You can find it on DNR's website or on YouTube. And then they also have these same videos for a lot of zoomed in locations, including the Hood Canal and San Juan Islands and some other intercoast locations. So just a really great way of kind of grappling and understanding how exactly that wave is going to interact with our inner coast. And then just to give you an idea of what that wave, that flooding on land might look like in our area, I've got both kind of downtown Seattle here, and then just to give you an idea of what it'll look like across the water, I also have Eagle Harbor and Bainbridge Island. Like I said, we have a lot more high ground close by, so we don't see the kind of inundation that we're expecting on the outer coast, where we have those nice, beautiful flat beaches. But we do see inundation, especially in kind of the downtown area, Harbor Island, the ferry terminals and things like that. This modeling isn't quite finer resolution enough to really show you that, but we definitely want folks getting away from the downtown, from the boardwalk, that kind of thing, to make sure that they're not there when the waves arrive. And then as we're thinking about what this event might look like, even just setting the tsunami aside and thinking about that ground shaking, we know we're going to have huge impacts to all of our infrastructure. And the four graphics I'm about to show, these two and the ones on the next slide, are from a study that's fairly old at this point. It's from 2011. But it basically was looking at our kind of different communication lifelines and utilities and things like that, and how they might be impacted by a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. As you can see, based on the color ramp, that's showing, are we expecting something to be either totally destroyed, moderately damaged, potentially not damaged, which we don't see a lot of, at least here in the Western Washington. But we can see that we expect a lot of impacts along the I-5 corridor. And that makes sense. That's where we have a lot of our infrastructure in our larger cities. But that's something to keep in mind as well, is that we'll have trouble getting supplies into some of those areas. We won't have access to a lot of our utilities. And same with our communication facilities, hospitals, things of that nature. We're expecting, big impacts and extended impacts. And then this is a newer study. This is from WSDOT, looking at bridges and how they will hold up to that same 9.0 earthquake. And I know it's a little hard to tell, but it's kind of got the same color ramp for, undamaged and then reopening times. the darker the colors, meaning, it will take longer to reopen. And something to keep in mind when you're looking at this is that the bridge reopening times are assuming an absolutely perfect scenario where we have the earthquake today and we start rebuilding our bridges tomorrow. We have all of the supplies and equipment we need to do that already. Wherever the bridge is, we have all the people that we need to work on that bridge already in place. So admittedly, a scenario that is not quite realistic. So add on some time to that as well. So we know that we are also going to have trouble getting folks wherever they need to be if we're in areas where we're relying on bridges, overpasses, tunnels, that kind of thing. So that was Cascadia, which is our biggest tsunami threat here in Washington. Like I said, 15 to 25% chance in the next 50 years. We also, however, have the Seattle Fault, which runs right through Seattle and Bainbridge and has been known to generate earthquakes large enough to also generate tsunamis. The last earthquake was in 923, so we are again kind of within that window. That was the largest earthquake that we have been able to tell has happened on that fault line for the last 16,000 years. So that gave off a lot of energy. That's not an event that we expect to see happening again anytime soon. Now, this is a different kind of fault. And what happens with this is that when the earthquake happens, one part of that fault pops up, and that will become very relevant in a second. So we will have a Seattle Fault earthquake. That's going to happen at some point. There's a 5 to 7% chance of having at least a magnitude 6.5 or higher on the Seattle Fault in the next 50 years. Because that's a crustal fault very close to the surface, that is very strong to severe shaking for potentially tens of seconds, maybe even to a minute. That's not shaking that we're going to necessarily feel across the entire state or across the West Coast. But if you're in Seattle or in that kind of surrounding area, you're going to feel like you're shaking in a box of rocks. Like that is not going to be a pleasant experience. Now, because there's one side of that fault pushing up, it means that if we have an earthquake large enough to generate a tsunami, and usually you need at least a 7.0 or a 7.1, the force of that tsunami, the majority of that water is going to be pushed north. And I'll show a video in a second that kind of shows what that looks like. Like I said, we need at least a magnitude 7.0 to 7.5 on the Seattle Fault to produce a tsunami. That's really, really big for our crustal faults. That's something that is a really low probability. So when I'm showing you this next video and some of the inundation maps, keep in mind that this is a very low probability event, especially compared to Cascadia, because there is more inundation. It is a bit more catastrophic for the Seattle area, but this is very unlikely to happen in our lifetimes. So this is another DNR video for the Seattle Fault. So you can see the earthquake begins, we get that ground shaking, and then again, that darker red is the height of the wave, cooler colors are the trough of the wave. You can see it kicks off really, really fast, but the majority of that impact is pushed north. And unfortunately, we can't see the rest of the south sound in this video. But if you could, you would see that we have far, far less kind of inundation and impacts down there. We have a lot more inundation in the Seattle area than we would expect for Cascadia. So I'm just going to let that play out a little bit. We also get a lot of, the waves bouncing off of our very tight waterways, very, very complex currents. And again, DNR has the current velocity videos for this as well. So definitely recommend checking it out if that's something you're interested in.
Will your earphones work or not?
I don't think they will.
Try.
Oh, I think we got a hot mic.
If they didn't work the last
Try
time,
anyhow.
I'm going to. Please.
All right, so here is the modeling for that Seattle Fault,
No,
really big 7.0 or 7.5 earthquake and tsunami. And I'm just showing here, I've got Seattle and then Bainbridge a little smaller, but you can see we have a lot more inundation for the Seattle fault, especially in, downtown, Harbor Island. Bainbridge has more inundation as well. And then very, very increased currents, especially as we get into kind of the shallower areas where we have a lot of maritime infrastructure. So should we have this happen, or when we have this happen, which is hopefully going to be in the far, far future, we do expect more inundation. These impacts will be much more localized, but this is a scenario where we do expect to see more impacts to Seattle from the tsunami itself. So when we are talking about a large earthquake and tsunami, regardless of kind of what the source is, what does that look like for the Seattle area? One thing is, damage to a lot of our infrastructure on or in the ground. So that includes, all of our underground pipes, pumps, and other systems that may lead to, power loss even outside of the inundation zone, water and fuel shortages, and potential hazmat situations, because we have a lot of stuff going through those pipes that might now be leaking, might catch on fire. We see that a lot in large earthquakes. Also, damage to our unreinforced masonry buildings and soft story buildings. So those that were built, before the 1970s, Seattle has a lot of beautiful old brick buildings, ones that have not been reinforced or otherwise are not up to withstanding that ground shaking for either that long or that intensive ground shaking. We can expect to see a lot of bricks coming off.
Elyssa,
Yes.
can you explain a soft story building?
Yeah, and I wish, I don't know if any of the pictures I've gotten here. Soft story buildings are essentially buildings, and I hopefully there isn't someone on who can explain it better than I can, where the first story is essentially not as structurally sound. So we have that a lot with buildings where the first story might be a parking garage or shops that are more open, something where it doesn't have the same structural integrity as either the floors above it, or it's not providing that same amount of stability as a structure that has more inside it. And so we see that a lot. Well, with buildings that have underground parking garages, or that are maybe they used to be warehouses and now they've been converted into smaller businesses and things like that. So any of those buildings that really have not been built or have not been reinforced, we're probably going to see damage to, as well as our bridges, overpasses, roadways. Unfortunately, a lot of those were built before we really understood our seismic history and our risk. And so we can expect to see quite a bit of damage to those as well. With the tsunami, damage to our port and marina infrastructure and goods, which will, even in just the short term, potentially in the long term, really impact our shipping and supply chains. So for Cascadia, especially where we are expecting all of our ports and marinas to be impacted to one degree or another, that will really impact how we are getting food and supplies in and out of Washington. And then we can also see a lot of secondary hazards. We might see landslides, especially along the inner coast where we have high cliffs and areas that we have built on that maybe aren't as structurally sound. As we're having all of those aftershocks, we may definitely start seeing landslides, especially if it's in the winter. We get a lot of fires post-earthquake. And then potentially we might see seiching or tsunamis in Lake Washington and Lake Union. And essentially seiches are the bathtub effect that you see sometimes if there's an earthquake and you see videos of folks, their pools or something sloshing around. When those seismic waves hit a body of water just right, they can really cause a sloshing effect that, when it comes to something as large as a lake, can be very damaging. And unfortunately, we don't have great don't have a great way to model seiching yet. And so our understanding of how that may impact Lake Washington and Lake Union isn't very well understood. We know that it can. We know that we've had landslides and other tsunamis impact our lakes in the past. We just don't really know quite how to predict what that might look like in the future. But we know that it probably will. So what can we expect in Seattle itself besides all of that? Definitely impacts to the waterfront, to the port, to the cruise and ferry terminals. My kind of nightmare scenario is, it's the middle of cruise season and we've got huge cruise ships that are sitting there as the tsunami waves come in, or we have folks who are on those ships. We will likely have visitors stranded in the city, whether that is employees who have traveled there and now can't get home, tourists or other day visitors who came and now either can't get home because they can't drive home, buses aren't running, ferries aren't running, whatever that is. We're also likely to have Seattleites stranded outside the city, whether that's because they commute somewhere else or they've gone somewhere else for the day. I know that there's a lot of planning done between Bainbridge Island and the folks in Seattle because it's likely that there will be people at either end of those ferry terminals trying to get the other direction. Lots of folks stranded one place or another because of, stranded and damaged ferries and cruise ships, folks who are on the water when something happens or can't get to where they need to go when everything is done. And of course, traffic. I really can't imagine how bad that's going to be, but I think it's going to be a nightmare traffic wise. So that's something to think about, even if it is a smaller event where some of our roads are passable, people can drive theoretically wherever they need to get. It's very likely that driving won't really be an option. So we want to make sure that people understand what those natural tsunami warning signs are, especially for folks who are new to the area or are day visitors, travelers, that kind of thing. I've talked about that, long or strong ground shaking on the coast. That's our best warning, especially for our local events. It's very unlikely that you're going to see another sign of a tsunami that has been generated locally without that ground shaking. But there are some other ways that we can notice tsunamis might be on the way, whether that is a sudden, rise or fall of the ocean, the water pulling away much faster than we're used to, the tides acting, the water, frothing or bubbling or just moving in a way that you're not used to. We all are we live around the water. We kind of know how the water is supposed to act. If it's acting kind of abnormally, that can be a sign. Or hearing a loud, what I've heard referred to as like a roaring sound, almost like a jet engine or a train, or even like a booming crashing sound coming from the ocean. Those can all be signs that something is approaching very quickly.
Elyssa?
Yes.
Real quick, something I read about a while back, which I thought was really interesting, and I can totally see it happening. Maybe the ground shakes a lot, maybe it doesn't. People aren't really sure what's going on, and the water starts receding.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody goes, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" and walks out on the beach and looks at the fish flopping around and just like, "Oh, this is really curious." And then the wave comes and gets them, and because they just didn't realize that the water leaving the beach is a sign. It isn't always the first thing isn't always a wall of water kind of thing. So
yeah, that happened. That happened in 2004 with the Indian Ocean tsunami. A lot of folks who were, either living in, Thailand and some of the surrounding countries, or who were vacationing there and were not aware of the tsunami risk and were close enough to the epicenter to feel that ground shaking. That's what they saw first. They saw the water pull out very, very far, and they didn't know why. And so a lot of them either went out to see what was going on, or a lot of the locals went to collect sea creatures that were kind of stranded. And they just had no chance once the water started coming back in, because by then when it's approaching, once it's kind of reached land or the shoreline, it can be moving 20 or 30 miles an hour. And that's why it's so important for folks to know In that same event, there was a little girl from Britain who had just learned about tsunamis in school. She was vacationing with her parents. She noticed the water was behaving really weirdly, and she was like, I know what that is. And she essentially threw a hissy fit until her parents believed her. And they went back to the hotel and told the folks at the hotel and managed to get the beach evacuated. And her beach was one of the only ones on that entire island that didn't have any casualties. So it's, yeah, just that little bit of knowledge. I really say, you know, if the water's behaving weirdly, if it's giving you a weird feeling in your gut, most of us around here are at least somewhat used to the water and what it does on a daily or kind of a tidal basis. Just get to high ground, especially along the inner coast. High ground's not far away. You don't have to go very far to see that you're either completely out of the inundation zone or you're at least far enough away that you can watch something come in and know if you need to move farther. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. For distant tsunamis, again, ones that we don't feel that ground shaking and we need to get official alerts, there are a lot of ways to do that. Some of those come to your smartphone automatically if we're under a tsunami warning. They may show up on the TV. I recommend having a NOAA weather radio, which I'm guessing a lot of you do because you're a little more plugged in than some folks. I also really like the NVS Tsunami Evacuation app. What's nice about this one is that it's for Washington and Oregon. And so if you travel to our coast or if you travel down to Oregon, anywhere along the coast, if you want to know what your tsunami evacuation route is, you can go into that app, put in your address, and pull up that evacuation route. It's also one of the few apps, at least that I have found, that actually pushes tsunami alerts. A lot of the other ones either don't or used to and kind of have fallen by the wayside. So if you go to mil.wa.gov/alerts, we have all of the different ways that you can get tsunami alerts, including information about the NVS Tsunami Evacuation app. That's one I really like.
And Elyssa, we're sharing this
Yes.
presentation afterwards. Yeah, thanks.
So, you know, if you feel that ground shaking on the coast, first, we want you to survive the earthquake. So, you know, drop cover and hold on, protect yourself. Don't try to move during that ground shaking, no matter how much you might want to, because you can very easily injure yourself and make it so that you can't evacuate. Once you feel it's safe to move, that ground shaking has stopped, we want you to move inland to high ground. Hopefully you've got an emergency bag with you or very close by. One thing that I really try to push for folks is, you know, don't waste time waiting for an alert or checking online. That ground shaking is your warning. If we're having a big enough earthquake that we're, you know, feeling long and strong ground shaking on our coast, there's a good chance that our, you know, cellular communication systems will be down, internet will be down, maybe power will be out. And so those alerts that you might normally get for something distant may not reach you at all. And if they do, they might not reach you in time. So that ground shaking is your warning. Get to high ground. Be prepared to evacuate on foot if you possibly can. One, because evacuation routes may be blocked if it's a local earthquake. There might be trees down, power lines, all sorts of dangerous stuff. But even if they are open or it's a distant event where we don't have problems with that ground shaking causing, you know, debris and knocking things down, during tsunami evacuations, we see a lot of traffic and we see a lot of injuries because of that. We saw only one death has been reported from the July 29th Kamchatka tsunami, and it was someone who was evacuating by car. I don't know what happened, but she lost control somehow. And California, when they had their tsunami warning back at the end of 2024, they also had several folks who were injured by cars or in cars while they were trying to evacuate. So the more people we have evacuating by foot, the better. And then we want you to stay at high ground until it's safe to return. As I said before, you know, tsunami waves can last anywhere from, you know, 12 to 24 hours or more. The currents that they generate and the whirlpools and other dangerous conditions can last longer than that. And if it's a really big event, we could have other dangerous conditions in the inundation zone, gas leaks, fires, things of that nature. So we don't want you returning to that area until local officials tell you it's safe. That kind of all clear is never going to come from the state. That's going to come from local emergency managers who understand what the conditions are like in your area. And then one thing I want to go over, partly because you all are in the emergency response field, and partly because we did just have a tsunami event, is what that state response looks like. So this is kind of assuming a distant event, something where we have time and we're getting alerts. So keep that in mind. But basically, if an earthquake is detected somewhere in the Pacific Ocean and there is no danger to Washington, the National Tsunami Warning Center issues an information statement that says, hey, no danger to Washington or no danger to the US West Coast. And we just pass that on, our Alert and Warning Center passes that on to local emergency managers so that they know that everything's okay. We know that there's no need to respond or anything like that. However, if there is some danger to Washington, or potentially if they are still evaluating that potential threat, which is what happened on July 29th, they may send out either an information statement that says, hey, we're still evaluating the threat to the US West Coast, or they may put Washington under a tsunami watch, advisory, or warning, depending on the level of that threat. Depending on that alert level, then the National Tsunami Warning Center issues alerts potentially over, NOAA weather radio, social media. You might get something on your phone, depending if we're under a tsunami warning, that kind of thing. Then information starts being pushed out. And if that's the case, if there's even a whiff of danger, that's when our State Emergency Operations Center starts activating. If we are under a tsunami warning, we activate the siren network. We start relaying information to our coastal emergency managers, getting staff like my team into the Emergency Operations Center to run that response. And then on the local level, all of our emergency managers are also enacting their tsunami response plans. And then within 1 hour of that first, earthquake detection or whatever the event is, the National Tsunami Warning Center hosts their first conference call for their state and federal partners. So that's their chance to say, hey, here's what we know about this event. Here's what we think, the next couple hours might look like. It gives us a chance to ask questions or, express any concerns, pass anything on from our locals. We then turn around and host a conference call of our own with all of our local emergency managers so that we can do the exact same thing. We can provide information, we can get any questions from them or any concerns, pass that on at the federal level, and make sure that we are all just in complete lockstep and understanding what everybody is doing everywhere along the chain. And then depending on how long that event goes, we keep that rhythm. So every hour there's a federal conference call, every hour there's a state conference call. We're all communicating together, making sure that we're providing that information and whatever else needs to happen for Washington. And then once that tsunami threat is passed, either we come to understand that a destructive tsunami hasn't been created, or potentially one has been, and it's many, many hours into the event and the waves have subsided. The National Tsunami Warning Center issues an alert cancellation. So that says, hey, there is no longer any danger to the US West Coast or to Washington. And that gives our locals the opportunity then to recognize, okay, we're not seeing huge waves anymore. I can now analyze whether I think it's safe for my locals to return. So that, as I said, that's not something that comes from us at the state. That's a local thing, although we can certainly kind of, provide guidance and be part of that discussion. And at that point, it's kind of ongoing responses needed. We've been very lucky in Washington, I think, the last couple decades, honestly, that we haven't had any destructive tsunamis or ones that have caused injuries. If we did, that's when we would move into that kind of response and recovery. But thankfully, we have not. And that brings me to July 29th and the Kamchatka Tsunami Advisory, our most recent event. So just to give you kind of a quick overview of this, at 4:25 p.m. Pacific time, there was what was first measured as an 8.0 earthquake off the coast of Kamchatka, Russia. Because it was such a large earthquake, originally the West Coast was issued that information statement where the National Tsunami Warning Center said, hey, we're still evaluating the danger to the US West Coast. At 5:19 p.m., the magnitude for that earthquake was revised to an 8.7 and then eventually to an 8.8, which made it the 7th largest earthquake in recorded history. So very, very big earthquake. At that point, we were all thinking, oh boy, okay, yeah, some sort of tsunami had to be generated from this. And at that time, we were put into a tsunami watch, which basically says, more information is coming. We think something might have been generated. Start getting ready to potentially take, protective actions. And at 6:27, they upgraded us to an advisory, which meant that they were expecting waves in Washington between 1 to 3 feet in height. So not something that was going to cause a lot of inundation, but something that would be dangerous for our maritime community and for folks who might be on the beach or near the water. The next day, so July 30th at 10:20 a.m., our advisory was finally canceled. The waves that we had been seeing had finally calmed down below that 1-foot threshold. So our whole tsunami response for that event lasted approximately 18 and a half hours, which is the longest response we've had in a very long time. The highest wave that we had recorded in Washington was 1.3 feet, so not huge, but still significant in terms of what damage could be done if we had folks on the water. And like I said, thankfully, we had no casualties or damage or anything like that reported for Washington. And this graphic just gives you an idea of the highest waves where they were reported. Again, not huge, but something that we wanted to keep an eye out, especially since there were some maritime events that were taking place on the water throughout the day of the 30th. So we wanted to make sure that folks understood what that risk was and were able to make good decisions. And just to give you an idea of kind of what those impacts looked like across the Pacific. So on the upper left is a video from Russia of that tsunami inundation. So you can see those waves coming in and, really inundating and kind of knocking stuff around in what looks like kind of like a business park or something. They've lifted up quite a large building. So as a local event in Russia, did cause a lot of damage, although we understandably have not heard a lot of reports from that particular country. And then in the bottom right, we have a video taken in Crescent City, California. Crescent City Harbor is usually hit very hard by tsunamis. It's in just the worst place possible. And so what you see in this video here is one of the docks being kind of knocked around and causing electrical sparking. And then it's hard to kind of see, but you see the breaker turn over and shut down the power to that dock. So again, Washington was not damaged, but we did see impacts on the US West Coast. And of course, much greater impacts where the tsunami was a local event. So whether you are in Seattle, where we really only have those local tsunami threats, or you're on our outer coast where we have both distant and local threats, we want you to know what to do and to be safe when you are on the coast. So before you are going somewhere along the coast, we want you to learn if you're in the tsunami inundation zone or if you're going to be visiting the inundation zone. Learn your evacuation routes and how to get those tsunami alerts. And then while you're on the coast, keep a go bag with you. It doesn't have to be huge. I know we talk about, all the things that you want in your go bag and, 3 days worth of food and water and things like that. But I've found that it can be kind of hard to remember to keep all of that with me, especially since I'm on the coast a lot for work. And so I've really slimmed down. I've got just a tiny little Ziploc bag that I bring with me with the absolute bare minimum to, keep me warm, keep me hydrated, keep, my blood in my body if I get injured. Just in case, the couple of hours that I'm in Ocean Shores are the couple of hours when something bad happens. Just the smallest go bag I have. also keep in contact. We had folks who were camping on the outer coast, of course, on July 29th, because it's the height of summer, and we're in pretty remote areas. So making sure that if you are going to be somewhere that either someone knows where you're going, or if you're camping or hiking, that you're making sure, state parks or national parks know where you're going. That way, if they need to find you in an emergency, they know where you're supposed to be. And then just keep your eyes open. Make sure that if something happens, you're ready to act and you know what to do, because regardless of all of these other things, knowing if you're in the zone, knowing how to get alerts, even having a go bag with you, being prepared to act is what's going to keep you safe in that moment. And finally, because it is August, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Great Washington Shakeout. The Great Washington Shakeout is coming. So Shakeout is the largest earthquake and tsunami drill in the world. We had more than 1.59 million participants in 2024. That was our highest number ever. And we are hoping to hit 1.6 or even 1.7 million this year. This year it is on 10/16 at 10:16 a.m. A reminder, not that this necessarily impacts you in Seattle, but if you are somewhere else on the coast, this is the one day of the year that we activate all of our tsunami sirens with the actual whale sound to test them. So if you are somewhere on either the outer coast or the North Puget Sound on that day, you may hear the sirens go off. Anyone can participate, individuals, families, businesses, all of our schools usually participate. It's a great opportunity to practice, drop, cover, hold on, and that one more thing to make sure that you're prepared. So you can register at shakeout.org/Washington. It's really easy. And if you have any questions, it's my team that puts Shakeout on and does all of the registration stuff. So we are always happy to answer questions or to help you register. And with that, I have some great different links here. mil.wa.gov/alerts is all things emergency alerting in Washington, not just tsunami and earthquake, but volcano alerts, local emergency alerts, how to make sure that your wireless emergency alerts are turned on your phone. mil.wa.gov tsunami is all things tsunami for Washington, including maps, how to find out if you are in the inundation zone, and different information like that. And then mil.wa.gov/preparedness has a lot of really great resources for getting prepared as an individual, as a family, as a business, or other agency or jurisdiction. So lots of great stuff in there. And then if you have any questions or if you want resources, anything like that, you can reach our whole team at public.education@mil.wa.gov. Thank you.
Elyssa, thank you. Hey, to the group, the reason I reached out to Elyssa to see if she would talk to us is because I had heard from a friend who is in the emergency management world that this whole 18-hour saga that Elyssa alluded to, this ongoing Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is you use, just the battle rhythm that they established where every hour people were meeting Elyssa and her team online and getting the updates. And Elyssa, if you can talk just briefly about working with the tribal leaders because of that canoe event that was going on. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, the annual tribal canoe journey is going on right now. And so we had quite a few folks who were participating in that, who were camped out on the beach that night and planning to canoe for most of the day the next day. And we're all across the outer coast and inner coast at different state parks and other locations. And so that was a surprise, and definitely the focus of the response, making sure that that all of those folks got information so that if they were close to the water, they were getting to high ground, pulling the canoes up, making sure that there was no damage that could be done, but also figuring out, do we want folks on the water the next day, and where are we expecting those higher currents or those impacts? And I know that there was at least one tribe who chose to have their folks just like trailer to the next location, so just drive. I think the Makah tribe chose to have their they're older, more experienced canoeists, or whatever the term for someone who canoes is. They went the next day, but they're, teenagers and kind of younger, less experienced folks trailered to the next location so that they weren't on the water when the currents were still tricky and unpredictable. And yeah, I was so proud of everybody, because that was, all of our tribes were on, the Coast Guard, Parks and Rec, Department of Ecology. Everybody was kind of working together to make sure that folks who were, in state parks or otherwise kind of in more out of the way areas and who may not be seeing social media or getting alerts otherwise were aware of the danger and were getting the information they needed. So yeah, that was fantastic. You couldn't have asked for a better way to test that communication.
Thanks, Alyssa. Any questions for Alyssa?
Elyssa, you said that we do not have very good models for the seiching in Lake Washington. I
Mhm.
live about 200 feet above the southern end of Lake Washington. Do the models give us even an order of magnitude of how big the seiching can be, or is it just completely unknown?
That I don't know. I think it's still fairly unknown, although the historical record may give us a better understanding, at least, of what's happened in the past. What I can say for folks who are in that area, at least, is all of the modeling we have done for Cascadia and for the Seattle Fault in the Seattle area assumes that all of the infrastructure, all the maritime infrastructure holds up. So that includes the locks, which I understand are fairly old. So don't, take me saying this with a grain of salt, but I wouldn't expect probably the locks to hold up to, very severe ground shaking. And figuring out how to model potential seiching in a lake with also tsunami coming in from the water is also going to be tricky. And that's something that we are very eager to do. It's not that it's, low on the list. I know that there are folks working on it. We just have not been able to pin it down yet.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm curious. I have folks who live in Ocean Park on the Long Beach Peninsula,
Mhm.
and the places you recommended for them to go for information.
That's Pacific County, I believe.
Right, right.
Yes, Pacific County. Our outer coast counties, especially, very, very aware of their hazard and very well versed in response. But mil.wa.gov/tsunami really is a one-stop shop. They'll be able to find maps and modeling there. We recently completed some loss estimates for Cascadia. They may not want to look at those if they live on the outer coast, but that provides some information about what we are looking at potentially for casualties and building loss estimates for that 9.0 earthquake and tsunami for all of our coastal inundation zone areas, and a lot of other good information too, information for the maritime community, all sorts of stuff. And again, if there's a question or if there's something specific they're looking for, they can always reach out to that public education email, and I will be more than happy to talk with them.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Karen.
Sure. I'm wondering about the interaction of a tsunami with the tides, low tide, high tide, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, is it obvious low tide it's less threatening, or is it not so obvious, the interaction?
I think it can be both. So definitely, if something's coming in on high tide, that means that we have to factor that in. The waves are going to be higher, which is partly what happened in this past event. The initial waves were coming in on low tide, and then the event was long enough that it was becoming high tide. But it really depends on the location. And I know that's a terrible answer, because we have some areas along our coast where the wave just interactions with the coastal geography are so interesting that I think the tides do definitely play a role. For one, we find that at Port Angeles, for whatever reason, for all of our modeling and for several of our past tsunami events that have been, big enough to have waves reach Washington, At 6 hours into the event, we see a big increase in the waves in Port Angeles. And it's because whatever initial wave arrived there has at some point bounced off of the local geography and is now coming back and amplifying that. And so I would have to know more about kind of each location, but the tides can definitely impact things for sure.
Great, thank you.
I just had a quick question about, I mean, it affects the entire West Coast, but I mean, do we have, I mean, any, I guess, connection to Oregon and California and their agencies and even Canada? Like,
Yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, sorry.
Is there like a like some kind of communication pipeline between all of everybody? Because then I guess we could, as far as resources, like if we're like kind of basically isolated here, like will we get help? Like from our
Yeah.
northern
So
neighbors, even though they might not like us right now, but you know.
I hope so.
Mhm.
Yeah, so one thing that's great about those federal level conference calls that happen each hour is that we are all on those calls. So that's all the states and territories who are in the Pacific, a lot of the other federal agencies, kind of everybody who has a stake in it is on those calls and is listening in. And then the National Weather Service also uses Slack, the communication tool Slack, for communicating during events, and we are all also on that. So when we have events, especially if it's kind of one of those weird undetermined danger where we're not quite sure if we are going to be, starting up and going for several hours or not. I get in there to say, hey, Washington's, we're paying attention, and California's in there, Oregon's in there. We are all in constant communication. All of the West Coast states, as well as all of the US territories, also are part of what's called the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program. That's a program run through NOAA, which is what funds a lot of the work we do, funds my position, funds most of my team. And so we work very closely through that grant program. We have different subcommittees that we're a part of. We're always sharing best practices, and after tsunami events like this, we do after action reports. So we're learning, what went well for you? What did you struggle with? Oh, hey, that's something we struggled with too. After California's tsunami warning at the end of last year, because they had a wireless emergency alert that went out to 8 million people. And the language in it was not great. It said, "You are in danger," in all caps. And it went to many more people who were outside the inundation zone than were in the inundation zone. So all of us in the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program got together and we're working on new, better language for that then we will give to NOAA to make the language that is now used when those emergency alerts go out. So yeah, we work very closely with everybody, which is part of the thing I love about my job and about this position, is getting to work with the other states and with the territories.
Yeah, thank you.
Elyssa, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And if you want to stick around for just a couple minutes, we're gonna talk to Sophia Lopez. She is the Office of Emergency Management Community Engagement Coordinator, and she is working on rolling out the tsunami warning plan for Seattle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for giving me a moment to speak. And I'm so glad I was able to catch this meeting. I don't get to catch all the quarterly hub meetings. And I was excited. I actually had forgotten until I saw Elyssa on there. I was like, oh, that's right. This is the one. It's so perfect because on the day of the Kamchatka earthquake and the subsequent tsunami advisory was the day I actually finished the draft of the tsunami communication. It's a tsunami evacuation communication strategy. And it's essentially just a plan that I was charged to put together for the city and for local businesses and community partners, just to know a timeline of work that we're going to be doing, programs we're going to be providing, partnering with different organizations about 6 weeks prior to the placement of Seattle's tsunami evacuation signs, which we've had for a few years. There's just been a lot of things happening in the city, and we're really excited, and it's all timely. It's perfect. So I'm really excited that it's going to be happening this year. Finally, it's in review with the leadership, so I'm just waiting patiently. And actually, Elyssa, it reminded me. I was like, I wanted to send a draft to you just so you can get your eyes on it. But I worked with Bainbridge a little bit to kind of help get my brain around this when I first started working on it. So there's a lot of, just to tack on to what she was saying about how much we all talk to each other. It's a lot all across the state too. Not just, we're the ones that's at risk for tsunami here, but we talk to so many people all over the state through the connections that Washington EMD built for us to utilize, which is just so phenomenal. So the plan will be rolling out, and part of that, there's going to be right now, Department of Neighborhoods is doing office hours at the Seattle Public Library. So they do 2 office hours a month in each of the the city's broken up into 4 quadrants. And so 2 libraries in each month, in each quadrant. So that's about 8 different opportunities throughout the city to come and spend some time with the Department of Neighborhoods and someone else from the city, or just to go visit with them if you have any questions about, maneuvering stuff at the city. But on some of those occasions in the areas that are impacted by tsunami, but also we're going to start there and then we're going to move outward from there. We're going to reach the whole city though. We'll be partnering with them just to be present for, I think they're 3 to 4 hour chunks of time where I'll be pulling up resources where folks can get to know your zone, sign up for emergency alerts, and just talk about what are the expectations, what are the evacuation routes, what are the areas that we'll be seeing the signs, what does it mean? And we're also working, because it's not just the people that would be impacted along the water by the waves. All of the individuals not being impacted by the waves themselves are going to be impacted by the people running out of the area of the waves. So these are small businesses, these are residential areas. And then we're also working with the Office of the Waterfront and the Office of Economic Development to make sure that we're being respectful and supportive and working in tandem with businesses and community groups specifically, as we work through, this planning that's happening. So part of our team, they are writing a tsunami plan, like a tsunami response plan. I'm working on the communication strategy that should be rolling out here shortly, where you'll start to see some of the graphics you saw in Elyssa's presentation. I have a number of them that I was able to personalize for the city of Seattle. And I'm hoping to invite Washington EMD to a couple of these office hours that I attend, or at least towards the end of the 6-week period, which I don't have a date yet on which it'll start because it depends on another department that oversees the placement of the signs. So there's a lot of partnership and coordination going on behind the scenes to make sure that we roll this out properly and that as many people are aware, informed, and nobody's blindsided by, well, all of a sudden there's this threat for tsunami that no one knew about. And that's what we're really working hard to avoid. Including getting things translated into in language and making sure that we're working with limited English proficiency populations, so they also understand the hazards and the risks, and what expectations they can see coming from the city.
Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah,
As you can tell, guys, this is a complicated issue. It is not an easy messaging thing. A round of applause for Elyssa and Sophia. Thank you, guys. All right, couple of announcements. I want you to consider again the Come From Away program at Seattle Rep. It's a fabulous play. The hub captains are getting together Saturday, June 6th to see it as a group. I will send out another reminder for that event. Tickets are discounted for us. And then there's going to be like a little happy hour kind of before the event.
June or December?
Oh, sorry. I don't know where I got June 6th. You're right, Erica. Thank you. Yeah, December 6th. So ways away, but get tickets soon. Okay, the next one is we're going to remind you again about a survey that's being routed to hub captains. It's all about micromobility. It is from our friends, Dr. Catherine Idzidarok. I'm going to screw up her name, but anyway, she is working on a doctoral degree on micromobility and how does it help communities post-disaster? So micromobility is bikes, that's the obvious one, but also wagons and scooters and shopping carts and anything that rolls or moves. How can that be used to help community support itself after disasters? So again, just a reminder that survey is coming out again if you haven't done it already. Next one. I think this was kind of important. A lot of us saw our neighbors signing up to to host a block party during National Night Out. And a lot of folks in our community signed up, and there was all these points of contact and their emails, and everybody could see it. But that map gets pulled down quickly after National Night Out. So I contacted one of the crime prevention coordinators, the one on the north side, and I said, hey, can we get those emails? She said at least the North Seattle one, and I think it might be all of them, are willing to send an email to all of these neighbors that put their email addresses on this large Seattle map, send them an email going, hey, if you're interested in emergency preparedness, can we share your email with the hub captains? So I have a way to gather all those, and then I will spread them out to you guys, and you can add these people to your mailing lists. So I'm hoping that will work, because I think these are folks that are A, community builders, and B, interested in emergency preparedness. Thought group update. For those of you that don't know, there is a group of hub captains and non-hub captains, both. It's kind of a diverse group. We're getting together to do some thinking about strategic planning. What are we going to look like 6 months to a year from now? Cindy wants to retire. I want to step back. I can't take over what Cindy does. She does too much. So how can we structure ourselves to be more sustainable? That's coming. The thought group actually meets tomorrow. I'm so excited. It's been a little difficult getting everybody together in the same room because of vacations, but we are getting together again tomorrow. And then I'm going to turn this over quickly to Linda Norland, who's going to talk about our word mark update, so kind of our marketing plan.
Some of you have been curious about what's happening with the word mark that the UW design team has done. The answer is they're not yet done with it. And by the next meeting, by our next hubcaps meeting, I will have more to tell you. We knew that when we started this project that we were up against the deadline of them having the fall quarter start at UW. And we knew that as it got closer to September, we would have less of their time, but they promised me that they will have it all done for us by our next meeting, which is the 25th of September. So I'll have more to tell you then. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Linda. And then real quick, just a couple more announcements. Actually, it's not quick because this is all the stuff we're doing in September. Holy moly, 16 events. I'm going to run through them quick. Happy Hour Capitol Hill. Ham radio class starts on the 6th of September. There is a bike event in Northeast Seattle. Bike riders are going to hit 7 hubs. September 7th, picnic in the park. A couple hub volunteers are hitting View Ridge to maybe talk to neighbors about starting a hub there. So that's Northeast Seattle. Cal Anderson is having a skills fair. Yay, Cal Anderson. The household preparedness event in Leschi. Another picnic again. Hub volunteers just kind of showing up, talking to our communities about the fact that we exist. So that's in Wedgwood. Ravenna is having a hub drill on the 14th. Yay, Ravenna. I want to encourage folks, if you're at all into this, September 18th, there is a tour, which is not a common thing, of the Cedar River watershed. Go on the calendar. You'll figure out how to register for that. I think there's a cost. But I've taken this tour back when it was open to the public. It is fascinating. So Cedar River watershed tour. Really interesting. September 20th is the second piece of that ham radio class in Meadowbrook. Mad Valley is doing some interesting things with more of a social aspect. They're really trying to do less drill and more social gathering, pulling neighbors together in Madison Valley. A hub drill in Laurelhurst and a hub drill in Finney. This is all on the 20th of September. That's a big day for us. Another household preparedness event in Crown Hill. Hub captains meeting September 25th. That's all of us. And then again, hub volunteers are showing up at a senior fair at Magnuson and just kind of talking to our neighbors. Lots of events. I will put these all in the wrap up to this meeting, and of course they're all on the calendar. So any last minute comments? Oh, yeah, Cal Anderson would love to have volunteers. I believe there's a sign up and I'll include that in the wrap up from this meeting. If you want to help out at the skills fair, Cal Anderson would love to have you, I'm sure. And please visit the drills and all the other events because it really helps when other hub volunteers show up. I think that's it, guys. Thank you. Elyssa and Sophia, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.